Today, we're going to talk about the metaverse.
The next evolution of the internet, called the metaverse, will be extended with 3D.
And we call this the metaverse. The metaverse. The metaverse. The metaverse.
Introducing Apple Vision Pro.
The metaverse. The metaverse. The metaverse. The metaverse.
Welcome to the 46th episode of Spatial Realities. My name is Thomas Riedel and I'm a tech journalist based in Cologne, Germany. I'm the host and producer of the Spatial Realities show. In this podcast, you learn all about XR, metaverse, immersive media, and spatial computing, especially for B2B, and what it means for your business. This episode kicks off the cooperation between the AWE in Vienna this year and the Spatial Realities show. Until the 24th and 25th of October, you will get exclusive interviews and talks with XR professionals and speakers you can listen to and meet at Europe's most important XR event this year. AWE Vienna brings together the entire European XR industry with over 2,000 attendees, 100 plus exhibitors, 250 speakers and over 5,000 square meters of expo. The AWE in Vienna will be the place where your XR business thrives. Also, take part at our giveaway contest, where you can win 2 tickets for AWE Vienna. The contest takes place in 3 unannounced episodes in the next 2 months. And if you don't want to bet on your luck to get a ticket for free, enjoy the 20% discount code as part of this community. Use Spatial20D to get 20% off your regular ticket price. Again, use Spatial20D, SPATIAL20D to get 20% thanks to our Spatial Realities community discount. And to learn more about the XR industry of the last 10 years, my today's guest has a lot to tell. Ori Inbar will give us deep insights into the time when the AR industry really kicked off. And that inflection point, you might have guessed it, was when Apple started the age of the smartphone. Ori started Augmented, which later was sold to Apple and was the foundation of what we know today as ARKit. Ori since then influenced and shaped the XR industry with starting the AWE conference and his investment company. You will learn why founding a startup in XR needs passion, persistence and patience, and why he thinks the AR industry is born in Austria. He will tell us about his years at German-based software company SAP and how all comes together to a big finally when Apple announced the Apple Vision Pro this year. I really enjoyed this conversation as Ori shares a lot of personal moments and insights which shaped the XR industry. And before I let you listen to the interview, I want to address all the XR companies and professionals out there. If you want to be part of the Spatial Realities community, getting interviewed by me for this podcast or in one of our meetups, share your product news, find new colleagues, or just share your experience with the community, join us on our Discord server or contact me. Find a link to Discord and to all the other resources of this podcast in the show notes. And now we are coming to an interview I've been very much looking forward to. My next guest is a serial entrepreneur, investor, and thought leader in the XR industries for decades. He is the co-founder and CEO of AugmentedReality.org, a global non-profit organization dedicated to advancing AR, and the producer of Augmented World Expo, the world-leading XR conference, which will take place end of October in Vienna. He's also an investor and former pilot, and I cannot wait how he can help us understand what is actually going on right now. Welcome to Spatial Realities, Ori Inbar.
Hi, Thomas. Great to be here.
It's very nice to have you on the podcast. And to kick things off, last time I checked your LinkedIn profile, I discovered this sentence on your profile banner: enter the next dimension with spatial computing. When exactly did you replace metaverse with spatial computing?
Oh, interesting question to start with. Spatial computing has always been our preferred term for this new wave of computing. You had mainframe computing, personal computing, mobile computing. The next wave is spatial computing. And, in 2018, I gave a keynote at the opening of AWE where I was really kind of trying to explain the difference between this new wave and all the past waves of computing. And the number one difference is that we're literally adding another dimension to computing. Up until now, it's been just two-dimensional. We always look at information, whether it's 2D or 3D, on a two-dimensional screen. And spatial computing adds another dimension, which is, it's not just about 3D, it's about having the information, the graphics, behave like real objects in the real world. And it's when this concept was invented in 1967 by Ivan Sutherland, he already captured that idea that you have an object. It was a very rudimentary object, but when you move your head, you see the side of the object just like you would in the real world. Where you reach your hand to grab it, it's just like in the real world. And that's, I think, the fundamental difference between this new wave and past waves. Now, the metaverse has been there for 30 years, mostly associated with the dystopian aspect of this technology. And until just, 2021, it was kind of in the back. Nobody was really using it in a big way until we started hearing from Roblox and Fortnite, and then later, of course, Facebook changing its name to reflect their new focus. And then all of a sudden it became the word of the day. And, I in my opening keynote that year, I kind of made a bit fun of this term. I did this kind of like a game show where that was called the Metaverse or Schmetaverse. It's kind of a way to, just poke fun in this term. On one hand, it was great because it brought a lot of attention and awareness to what we've been all doing for decades. But it also had sort of a futuristic, semi-dystopian feel to it that made it feel like, it's still far away in the future. And that compromised a lot of what was already happening in the industry for both AR and VR today. So that's why, wasn't 100% behind that term. Plus, the things that I think many people in the industry were trying to really define what it is into detail. And I think that was a kind of a futile exercise because I think in many ways this term is like cyberspace. When cyberspace came about in the 80s and then people used it as a way to describe the internet, they didn't get into protocols or, integration technologies. It was just kind of a general term to say, we're going online, we're going into cyberspace. And I feel like this should be more of the way to use the word metaverse. It's, it's that place that we go into when we're in VR or sometimes, AR. And you don't have to be bogged down with all the details and the definitions because that confuses the hell out of everybody.
Yeah.
So that's my beef with that word.
So you're almost happy that it's gone. It's not gone, but it's a little bit in the second row maybe. It's still there. Meta is still talking about it. Epic is still talking about it. But somehow you are also glad that spatial computing is maybe back, or maybe even as big as it has never been before. Maybe it goes full cycle when the listeners know that you actually have been maybe a part of the Apple journey when you sold Augmented to Apple. So you have been very close to the company, which actually now released a new headset and is bringing back spatial computing. So maybe full circle here.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, the hype was, I think, way too high and too crazy in 2021 and beginning of 2022 before it crashed. Like everything that is overhyped, it's bound to crash at some point. So I cannot say I'm happy about it, but I think I'm happy that the conversation is not about that term so much, and it's not about how soon can Meta make billions of dollars from it, but really about the substance of it. About really developing valuable technologies, getting people to use it, to enjoy it, to adopt it without the craziness that was associated with it in 2021. And yeah, and Apple, it's I'm sure we'll talk more about it today, but I think one of the best things about their announcement is really the fact that they chose to stay away from the metaverse. I mean, it's kind of semi positioning and competitive positioning, if you will, but also their belief in AR. Actually, that's their main goal in life. And you heard that, from their CEO for a number of years now. That the focus of the company is on AR because it's kind of like what drew me into AR. It's the idea of not necessarily escaping the real world and going into a different world, but staying in the real world and just connecting better with things, with people, with your environment in a deeper way, and allowing you to leverage a lot of the information from the internet in your real world, in your day-to-day world. So I kind of connect to that idea. And the fact that they chose spatial computing to describe it, I think it's very much in line with Apple's ethos, which is, let's use simple terms. XR is a very technical term. I'm not to mention AR, VR, all these acronyms that just confuse most people out there. So spatial computing is kind of going back to your point to this simple way to define the difference or what's new about this new wave of computing compared to what we've been using in the past.
And they use similar expressions before, like personal computing. So people are used to it, and it's maybe easier to make that shift into that direction.
Exactly.
So listeners of this podcast already know that as much as I love to talk with young startups about their new products, I also love to look back into history because there's much to learn, I believe. And as you, Ori, have been in this space for so long, I would be grateful if you could take us back to where it all started for you personally. You just mentioned it a little bit already, like why you're so enthusiastic about AR. When was your first contact with AR or XR or whatever it was, maybe the idea of a 3D internet where you can go into and not so much look at it? Was it maybe even as early as 1992 when Snow Crash came out? Was it earlier? Maybe you can tell us a little bit when that journey actually started.
Yeah, happy to share that. And to your point, I think learning about the history of XR is extremely important. And a lot of the folks that are kind of jumping into this industry in the last few years can learn a lot from what happened there, and based on that knowledge and understanding, they can prepare better for the future and just accelerate the development of this whole industry much faster. So yeah, I my first interest in the space was in the early 90s, indeed, when VR was a hot thing. And I felt, this is what I want to do. VR sounds like a really cool thing. Of course, very quickly, it kind of disappeared. It crashed real hard. And I guess by 1993, you almost never heard of VR anymore. And there was this new thing that came about, the internet. So I was really fascinated with that and started working in startups that built internet products, mostly for enterprises. My startup Top Tier was acquired in 96 by first Bon, which was an enterprise solution provider, and then by SAP. And I spent several years at SAP, kind of taking that internet portal product that we built in the startup to 40,000 of the largest companies in the world. And that was a fascinating process. I learned a lot about businesses, about how to bring software to large organizations and the value that you can really get out of it.
When you have been at SAP, have you been in Germany then?
I had quite a bit of visits to Waldorf, where SAP is headquartered, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Okay.
It's definitely a big part of my history during those days. So, in 2007, I decided that was a great experience, but it's time to leave and go back to my roots, in startups, and we're looking for, new things. And, so I, as I say, came home to spend time with my kids, and I realized they're always in front of a screen, watching TV, playing video games. Mobile wasn't that big yet, so they weren't so much on social. But they were still staring at a two-dimensional screen, and I thought, "Hey, guys, you have to spend some time in the real world. Go play outside. Interact with people, with things like I grew up as a kid." And I realized, you can't really force them to get away from the screen. I mean, video games are just too good to avoid. So that's when I had this kind of revelation that if we can try to extract some of the things that attract kids and adults to video games, to the internet, and bring it into the real world, we could actually get the best of both worlds. And, started researching, and of course found that I wasn't the first to come up with this idea. Augmented reality has been around for decades, but it's been really hidden in a few labs around the world. And no one heard about it. I never heard about it until that time. So I felt like, it would become my mission to try and bring this amazing technology to everyone, to the masses. The first challenge was, of course, what device can we consume it with? Because at that time, up until 2007, there were a lot of custom-made solutions that looked ridiculous and awesome at the same time. Huge backpacks, and you were kind of carrying a GPS receiver in your back, and huge headsets. Was pretty ridiculous. But at that time, of course, the iPhone was just announced, and right after that, Android, and it felt like it could become the ideal device to actually enable the interaction and consumption of augmented reality. So that felt like it's really the beginning of the flourishing of this industry. Kind of when the industry was born is around 2009, I think.
And where have you been located back then?
I've been based in the United States. I came to the States in 1998 from Israel and spent some time, in San Francisco, some time in New York, was kind of coast hopping for different jobs, and I just like both of them about the same amount. And and started meeting with a lot of these labs, and researchers. The first most impactful opportunity was an event called ISMAR. ISMAR is the premier event for academics to share the latest research in AR. I think it's now been running for 25 years, so it's been around for a long time. And I went to the event in Cambridge, UK in 2008, and I was completely blown away. I mean, you had all these kind of gods, researchers, professors that have been researching it sometimes for decades, and have been showing some really incredible innovations. And I felt this is happening. It's here. We just need to find a way to bring it to everybody. And, I was sitting in the audience. I started a new blog, probably the first blog that was focused on augmented reality. It was called Games al Fresco, as in playing in the real world. And people were starting to like whisper, "Hey, there's a blogger in the audience." And they were blown away as well that actually somebody outside of their very close-knit research group was interested in that topic. And it was blogging in real time. So it was kind of a pretty radical change for them. and, you know, helped me connect with a lot of these people, learn more about where the technology is, until I felt, you know, it's actually probably a good time to start a company. I felt like, you know, where all the ingredients are there, and with a little bit of a push and passion, it could become something interesting. So I started Augmento at the time, you know, 2009.
And when you started that, what was the business opportunity? I believe you didn't just did it because all the researchers had great papers, had great fantasies, but you probably saw any kind of business opportunity you wanted to fulfill. Or was it really just like building Second Life?
No, I think it was very much kind of a conversion of many things that happened at that time. So I think one, like I said before, you know, all of a sudden you had this device that everyone has in their pocket that can allow you to experience augmented reality in a pretty good way. So that, you know, in 2009, it was already kind of the App Store was open, the SDK was out. It's interesting to note that at that time, the SDK did not allow you to access the camera. So you could not really do augmented reality without jailbreaking your phone. So that was kind of the first step. But, you know, about a year later, it became possible. Actually, you know, it's interesting. I joined forces with a few other entrepreneurs, and we wrote an open letter to Steve Jobs at the time to plea for Apple to open the SDK so that
Yeah.
augmented reality can become an actual official thing. And they complied pretty quickly, actually. I don't know if it was our letter or not. You never
Did
know.
Steve Jobs
But
reply or?
no, there was no reply. Just, I mean, they never
Okay.
reply to these kind of things, but the SDK became open. So that was one thing. The other thing is that from the research community, we saw some initial capabilities that were actually working on mobile phones. Because before that, you know, you need a very powerful computer, and there were a few researchers, just brilliant folks, that were able to make it work on an iPhone, a jailbreak iPhone, but still an iPhone. And that kind of gave us confidence that we can do more. And, you know, my thought at the time was that some of the older generations are probably a lost cause for augmented reality. You know, they're so entrenched into personal computing, into, you know, 2D computing, that it's going to be really hard to convert them. So I said, let's focus on the young kids, on the young folks. And we believed in the power of augmented reality to teach and help people learn, you know. So again, take some of the things that attract kids to video games and bring it into the real world. So the first game that we decided to go for was a spelling game, learning how to spell for young kids. So at that time, there was something called NFT, not what we call today NFT. It was natural feature tracking. And that was kind of an innovation, a new innovation in AR that allows AR to track any image. Because before that, you needed markers that looked really ugly, wasn't really consumer friendly. But now all of a sudden you could use any image. So we said, you know, we'll create a mat, like a very beautiful mat that you put on the table. You point your phone to it, and it recognizes that. And then all of a sudden you have this little cute panda that pops up and kind of guides you through the game and shows you a word and with a missing letter, and you would have to use actual physical cards of all the letters and put the right letter in the correct space. The AR system would be able to recognize that letter and tell you, you know, if you got it right or not. So it kind of involved the idea of you know, digital characters that are fun and interactive, but also physical cards that were always really important for learning. I mean, I think every educator would tell you that learning physically, where you interact with physical things, has much better retention and better learning than with digital information. So that was kind of the idea. And the missing part was really just getting an AR SDK that would work on the iPhone. So we're talking about iPhone 3.
Yeah.
You can imagine today running anything on that phone. It's just a lost cause. It's so slow. But we found this company in Vienna. So we're now actually coming back to Vienna,
Wow.
where it all started. In 2009, met with a company called Imagination. They were connected with Graz University, which is also a very kind of one of the early centers for AR development for maybe a decade before that. They were working on converting some previous SDKs to the iPhone. So we worked with them on that. And we were getting really close to releasing this game until something happened.
Yeah.
Another major milestone in the industry, and that is Qualcomm acquired that company, Imagination. And that, of course, became Vuforia, which was and still is one of the most popular AR platforms in the market. So, we're happy that it's being adopted on such a big way, and all of a sudden, millions of developers will have access to it. But of course, we had to close the plans with this game and shift it to other things. So that was kind of the beginning. That some of the trends and the conversion of things that led us to start this company.
Yeah. And Augmented got sold to Qualcomm.
To Apple. Actually, I wasn't in the company at that time, but in 2015, it was acquired by Apple. Mm-hmm. It was in a string of acquisitions that Apple made in the AR space. I mean, first it was PrimeSense, which is we're all using now in our iPhones as a LiDAR, basically. And then Metaio, which was probably the leading AR startup out of Munich, Germany, for the decade leading to that. And then Augmented. And Augmented at the time was actually introducing a new AR platform for, an SDK for tracking using your phone. It was the most advanced in the market. Google adopted it as part of their Tango product, which was also kind of a device dedicated for AR. It never really took off, but at that time was just an amazing device. Kind of what the iPhone can do today with 3D recognition. Tango was able to do then, so they used the Augmented platform. And again, Apple acquired it, and that became the foundation for what we know today as the AR Kit.
Yeah.
So really proud to have a bit of a part in that whole process. But it kind of shows that Apple didn't just jump on spatial computing in the last year or two. This is something they've been planning for over a decade, starting with developing the software, the tools, as well as the hardware, the cameras. And we see a lot of it is coming together in the Vision Pro that really includes all these technologies and is following kind of what is now 5 or 6 years since the AirKit was launched, in which many developers, probably 1 million developers, were trained on how to use this AR platform, how to develop with it, what are the concepts around it. Of course, we have to make the transition from doing it on a 2-dimensional smartphone to a headset. It's a big jump, but a lot of the education, the training already happened over these days, these years. So I think they're in a much better position now to be releasing this device to a market that is already waiting for it for a number of years.
Absolutely. And I think they give their best to make that transition easy. Everything looks almost 2D, although it is in 3D, which is funny. But if you as you just mentioned, think about how to bring people into this new space, it makes totally sense, in my opinion, that it actually looks like a window on a MacBook or on an iPad, because people know how it looks, right? It's their strategy, some kind of, how did they call it on the iPhone in the first place? Skeuomorphism.
Skeuomorphism, exactly. Yeah. That's if I had seen that 10 years ago, I would have been really pissed off, because this is you're missing the whole point of augmented reality, of spatial computing, if you're just showing 2-dimensional screens. And by the way, I did a presentation back in, I think, 2013, where I was showing examples of skeuomorphism, that same idea that, people are kind of using cues of old user experience with a new technology, and that sometimes it helps people adapt to a new technology. So obviously this is what Apple is doing now. They don't want to make it too futuristic or too far off from what people are used to. So in that sense, I really appreciate their approach. It's like, they didn't really position it as a completely revolutionary new way to do things. They didn't have any crazy AR experiences in their demos. So that's actually why a lot of the people in our industry were disappointed. I mean, where's the cool AR stuff? But it was part of the strategy to really make it feel like it's a just a small step forward. It's not
Yeah.
you can still use your computer, your laptop. You just have a few more screens, So it's not. Don't be so afraid of this change.
Yeah.
And I think that's really smart. It's going to be up to us, to developers, creators, to really leverage that headset and show what AR can really do and how it can really be different than the existing computing that we're knew of.
Absolutely. They didn't do something like push you into a crazy ride in the metaverse, but really just copied what you could already see. Very clever, I think. Going back to your history a little bit, I'm always also interested in conferences. And a year later, after you started Augmento, the AWE started. So how did that happen? Who joined you there? What was the idea and how was the first edition?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is that, back then, if you think about 2009, there were probably a couple of dozen companies working in the space. I'm not talking about the academia, but just companies that were trying to make business with it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were spread all over the world. It was pretty lonely in AR back then. And, I was living in New York, and sometimes you're like, you're working with your team and it's like, nobody understands us. Nobody really knows what we're working on. You talk to people about augmented reality, they look at you like you're from outer space. So it felt like, we need to join forces with all the different entrepreneurs and all the leaders in the space, bring them into one room and try to really make sense and also, build some energy from this joint or unified belief that we all had in this technology. And that's exactly what happened. In 2010, we brought in, a few entrepreneurs, many researchers. There were 300 people in the room, just a fraction of where it is today. People were talking about a lot of ideas and concepts. There weren't a lot of products out there. The expo hall consisted of maybe 12 companies in a space that is the size of the Qualcomm booth from last year, basically. That was the whole expo hall. And Qualcomm, by the way, was there. I mean, they actually helped launch this event that was the launch place for Vuforia to the world. So it was very cool. Yeah, but if you look at the names that were there, individuals, but also companies that were there, you had, probably 30 or 40 Fortune 100 companies that were there because, they were looking for ways to innovate in the business. And some of them already experimented with that technology at the time. I mean, of course, we know Boeing was in AR since the early 90s. The term was coined at Boeing, augmented reality. So there was, there were a few of these companies there from different verticals, different industries. More than anything, I think it really helped generate energy. So you feel, you're not alone. You're not crazy. There's more people working on this. And we collaborated in kind of making, just a bigger noise, a bigger voice about AR in the market. And that helped. And, from there, kind of year over year, it grew along with the industry. We always felt like, AWE is on one hand reflecting the state of the industry, but also we're always hoping that we have a bit of a dent in it. Again, just bringing people together, good things happen. And that's still the motto for us today.
And how many people are you today in the team?
Oh, the team, we're 12 people on the team. I feel like today probably have the best team we've ever had, the most complete. So we can really, deliver a great experience for attendees, for exhibitors and sponsors, and also make sure that, people around the world are aware of this community. It's not just an event. At the end of the day, it's a community with a shared mission and goal in mind, which is really to help advance AR and VR and bring it to everybody. I mean, our mission today is to bring XR to every single person on Earth. By the way, in the beginning, we set up a sort of a moonshot of achieving 1 billion users by 2020. So, back from, if you think of from 2010 or 2012. And it sounded crazy. But actually, if you look back at what happened in 2019, 2020, of course, it was a pandemic that changed things. But at that time, we actually, as an industry, we crossed the 1 billion users. It wasn't really active users necessarily. A lot of them just, tried it and maybe didn't come back to it. And many of them were using, face filters or, silly things like that, or were playing Pokemon Go, which some would not consider, as a full-blown AR experience. But that number actually was achieved in time. And so then we said, okay, moving forward, it's about reaching the rest of the population on Earth, and with strong focus on diversity, because in order for this technology to be relevant for every person on Earth, you have to involve every person on Earth, from all regions, from all races, from all communities. And that's kind of a big part of what we're trying to do with the AWE community. So again, it's not just the events. I mean, the events are now running. We have large events running in the US, Europe, and Asia. This year it's in Singapore at the end of August. But also meetups that are running on a local basis in now 35 cities around the world, from Tokyo all the way to Mexico City and everything in between, many in Europe, many in the US and Canada. And even in Africa, we have a couple. So these are kind of grassroots communities that meet on a regular basis with their local communities. Each one is different. They bring different things to it. But then they're connected with this global umbrella of the AWE community. So people can share ideas, can share concepts, companies among those groups. And of course, meeting in person in the large events where, if we learned one thing from the pandemic in 2020 and 2021 is that digital information is amazing, and it can allow us to connect in ways that we've never thought possible before. But nothing replaces the in-person interaction. That's when magical things happen. Startups connect with investors, brands connect with creators and developers, people find jobs, and of course companies hire people. And one of the things that we hear over and over again is that many new startups were actually born at AWE. There's a story of the Blipar founder, one of the leading AR companies. He came to AWE in 2011 to check what's going on, and connected with his co-founder and said, we actually have something that no one has. Let's start a company. And that's how the company was born. And there's literally hundreds of stories like that from people that came to the event, saw what's out there, either met their co-founder or their investor, came up with an inspiration to start a new company. And that's really what we're so happy about.
Yeah, and it's really great when you have about 13 years of history, all those people coming together, all those companies being found. And of course, this year, I already mentioned a couple of times in this podcast episode, we will have one edition in Vienna where Augmented actually was founded in the first place, now coming back to Vienna. And of course, everybody in Europe is asking, why should they go to Vienna? What's so great about this edition this year? What are you excited about?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, really, it's coming back to where a lot of I could say, the air industry was born in Austria. I mean, there's Wiki2 on one hand, technically started in Salzburg, but, it's Austria. Austria is small.
Yeah.
And then, Vuforia and a lot of the research that came out of Graz University, which is near Vienna. So on one hand, it's kind of closing a circle and coming back to where a lot of it started. Of course, Vienna it's just a beautiful city, one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. So it's, for me personally, it's great to be back there and to have people kind of experience it, sometimes for the first time. And it's of course very central to Europe. Short train ride from folks in Germany, in Munich, and other places. It's a very welcoming city for travelers, for business travelers. So it's just a fantastic place to bring AWE together in Europe.
And do you have any content advice what people should look after on the conference, for example? Do you already have any highlights? I mean, it's still almost 2 months until the conference, but are there already any highlights you should say people have to see it?
First, there's a really strong XR community in Vienna. XR Vienna, it's a fantastic community that is so excited that we're bringing the event to the city that they're really kind of opening arms, and everyone that wants to kind of understand what's going on there should connect with that organization. We're yet to publish the agenda at the end of August. So, right as people come back from vacation, they'll be able to kind of check out the agenda. But we've published almost 100 speakers already.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there's if you go to the AWE blog, you can find an article that talks about some of the highlights that are already planned for the event. As always, we try to cater to all the different parts of the ecosystem, from developers, creators, enterprises, hardware and software, and different verticals, from retail to marketing to e-commerce and training, and we also will have some focus on Web3 this year, which is becoming more and more overlapping with XR and the metaverse, of course. And also AI. AI is going to be a big topic at this event. It's a big topic in the world. And I think it's important for people to understand that AI is not replacing XR. AI is actually making XR better. It's in some ways, XR is the interface for AI. And that was already demonstrated in a big way at the previous AWE in Santa Clara, California. And I think we'll see more of that at the event in Vienna. But I think the bottom line is that whatever your interest is in XR, you'll find something interesting, whether it's in the talks on the agenda, the thought leaders that will be speaking or interacting with, or on the expo floor, where we expect, over 100 exhibitors, maybe 150 exhibitors from across the entire ecosystem from around the world. Another, really important highlight for me is the startup pitch competition.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something, we started the very first event in 2010 is to bring startups, to have them pitch in front of investor judges, and then pick, kind of the startup to watch, the most impressive startup that would be then recognized with the AWE Award. The AWE Award is kind of our trophy that we've been given out since 2010. The big AWE Awards ceremony is in the US. Usually that's kind of the annual award ceremony where we award, about 20 companies. In Europe, we do it, mostly for kind of the best in show. So, the most impressive companies and startups at the event. So the winner of the startup pitch competition will get that. But I think more than anything else, that's an opportunity for startups to just showcase their achievements and be heard and have a stage. And for the audience, for many startups in the audience, it's kind of to see what others are doing,
Mm-hmm.
learning from that, learning from the mistakes, learning from their successes, so they can come back and pitch in a future event.
This really sounds like these are 2 days full of content and everybody doing something with AR, VR, XR, metaverse, spatial computing, whatever you name it, should actually go to Vienna and check this event out. So there's actually no excuse not to go to Vienna this year. It's so close, it's so central. I want to see you all in Vienna. And please, if you recognize me or Ori, talk to us, because this will be great to connect to everybody.
Absolutely. Actually, I want to add that for your listeners, if they're looking for a discount, if that would help get into the event, then we're sharing a 20% discount with your community. We'll have it in the information, so people can just click on it and get that discount.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for AWE. Another thing which was pretty important for you, I guess, was the founding of augmentedreality.org. Please explain, what is it? When did you start it and why?
Yeah, so augmentedreality.org is a nonprofit with a mission to advance augmented reality and virtual reality. And it basically started as the foundation behind AWE. So, we needed an organization that will actually produce this. So that's what augmentedreality.org was created for. It's been just a great way to get the goodwill of everyone in the industry. Because again, we didn't have it wasn't about making money off the back of anyone. It was really about helping advance this mission that started when we got into the space. And I think that helped a lot. Today, it's kind of in the back, but it's still what's running all the meetups around the world. They're actually part of the augmentedreality.org. So it's still true to this idea of a grassroots movement. They're all volunteers that are running these events around the world and really delivering on that mission of helping advance this industry.
Yeah, awesome. So another perspective of you and your work is that you are the founder of Super Ventures, which is investing in XR. And when did you start that and pull out some of your success stories, your track record, let's say? What are some success stories you would say really turned out to be great investments?
Absolutely. Since I started my journey in XR, I've been approached by many startups, about just providing advice, give us a sense of what's happening in the market, where should we go, strategic advice. Many kind of put me on their advisory board or on their board. And that was fascinating just to be able to help many companies in a closer kind of one-to-one way, because we believe that with AWE and the community will help everyone, but here it was kind of more focused on specific companies. And then also at some point we started to see a lot of investors that reach out to me for advice. What are the good companies out there? Where is this going? How big is this market going to be? And I felt like, in 2015, it started to reach kind of a boiling point where there was just so much interest that it felt like it might be the time to actually put our money where our mouth is and start a venture fund. So I joined forces with three of the best people in the industry that I could find, Thomas Emmerich, Matt Meisnix, and Mark Billinghurst. And we started Super Ventures. I think at the time it was the first fund dedicated to investing in early stage AR companies.
Mm-hmm.
We raised a small fund initially. We're not people that come from the VC space or from the finance perspective. So it was really about really helping move this industry forward, just like the mission of AWE. We started investing. We invested over 3-4 years in 15 companies. And it was kind of investments, almost like an activist investor, in a sense that when we saw a category that is really important to bring to increase the awareness about this company or about certain technology, to demonstrate a new piece of this whole puzzle, we invested in these companies. And, some of them were extremely successful, like 6D, 6 Degrees that Matt Meisnix led and sold to Niantic a few years later. And it really kind of demonstrated the kind of a whole set of possibilities that, the larger companies just never got to that point because, they needed to create something much wider and they couldn't run as fast on something very specific. But, others, were kind of struggling at that time. I mean, obviously, when you're building a company that works on translating foreign languages into your own language in AR. So, think about pointing your phone to a menu or to a street sign in China and seeing it in English. That was kind of one of the first use cases. But then you have companies like Google that decided to focus on that and offer a free product for that purpose. So it was kind of harder for some of these companies to succeed. But I want to say that, maybe the biggest contributions that Super Ventures had is just in evangelizing this whole industry, supporting startups as a whole, and also helping other investors figure out what this industry is about. So a big part of our time was really spent on working with other investors, almost like creating this coalition of investors that share information about the deals, about the direction, and that was a very fruitful partnership with many of those.
And you're still active, right?
We're still active, although right now our fund is fully deployed, so we're not currently making investments in new companies. Of course, we're still advising every week I get free requests for me to join the advisory board or in some other capacity, and that's always fun. I mean, a big part of my time is still helping startups. I try to meet with every startup in the market, at least for a little bit, and give some advice. With some of them, of course, where I spend more time, then there's some engagement with that company, which is a bit deeper.
Yeah.
It's always kind of been a fun part of my job, of my day to day. So right before the pandemic hit, I was leading an accelerator for XR in New York City. It was called the R Lab, which was funded by the city with NYU as kind of the operator.
New York University.
And that was, again, a fascinating experience to really bring together startups and help them get funding and advance in the market. And then March 2020, all of a sudden, it had to be closed. So we transitioned online. So I started actually doing classes online for startups. That was an amazing experience because all of a sudden you could have startups from all over the world join and get the benefit of this without the need for relocation or all these kind of long-term commitments. And that was also a very rewarding experience, which is still happening today.
And what should young entrepreneurs keep in mind when they start a new XR startup in some way? I mean, a lot has changed in the last years. What do you think should they focus on? What should they bring to the table that you would be interested, or anybody else would be interested in it?
Yeah, it's kind of going back to where we started, which is you have to look at the history and really understand what came before you, so that you know how to position your company in the best way possible and avoid mistakes of the past. And I that's kind of how I opened my my keynote this year, which is XR is hard. It's been taking so many more years than we all anticipated. When I started in 2009, I thought, in a couple of years we'll all be using AR, and it's still an uphill battle. Although this technology is so compelling and so valuable to many people, it takes a lot more time than anything else. A lot more than social media. A lot more than
e-commerce,
SaaS software, and more than AI in many ways, because it's kind of a big shift in everything that you can think of around the technology and how you use it. And the hardware, it just takes a lot more time. So one of the most important characteristics that I look for in an entrepreneur and a startup is the passion, persistence, and patience, because it's going to take a lot longer than you think. And you have to kind of be ready for the long run. So, when you raise money, don't spend it all over, a year or two. Make sure to create a long runway. And again, look at what people have done before you. One of the kind of the biggest values that I offer a lot of the startups today is just telling them, who else is trying to do or try to do what they're trying to do. And there are not a lot of new ideas out there. A lot of them have been tried. And it doesn't mean that now, it's not the right time to try a new idea, but learn what people have done before you. That's such an important thing. And a lot of the new entrepreneurs are actually not looking enough to what others are doing. They feel like, they're reinventing the wheel, and that could be a futile exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say that in the XR industry, startups have to be more patient than in other industries because of, for example, the very hard hardware component?
I think so. Of course, there's other industries or technologies where even took longer than what it's taking for AR and VR. But it's very visible in our industry, very transparent, that things are taking longer than anticipated. Yeah, part of it is the hardware, but again, it's not just the hardware. When I started pitching projects with Augmented back in 2009 and 10, I was getting meetings with some of the top advertising firms in New York and some of the top publishers. And the first reaction is you see a jaw dropping. They're like, "Oh my God, this is incredible." But then the next step is head scratching. Like, how are we going to use it? How are we going to put it in the hands of our users in a way that is, scalable to kind of how we're expecting our technologies, our products to be, and that's where it's harder to achieve. So yeah, I think patience and perseverance, and there's some startups that are still big players in the AWE community that have started back then, in 2010, 2011, 2012, and they've been at it for year over year until they actually were able to find a market. Especially, if you look at some companies in the enterprise space, it took a long time to actually find a market, and eventually they found it. And you have startups that are very successful at kind of selling. Some of them got acquired by larger companies, but they're delivering solutions that companies need and are using today, and it's improving their businesses. So, some people sometimes feel like AR is still the future, that no one is really using it today, but that's not the case. You have millions of workers, of employees that are using it every day to improve their business.
Mhm.
So the use cases are there. It's just a matter of really continuing to scale it and reaching out new people, new companies.
Yeah. So we have let's say, the time when we have been able to push augmented reality into B2B, like Google started it with the Google Glass, and today we have Unreal, which just got rebranded into X-Real. Elon Musk might not like this, because everything with X, he thinks it's but okay. But what we are waiting for is the big push into mainstream. So I have the feeling that, okay, although we have done this push into B2B, and we do have actually some great cases for that, and it's getting used more and more in the industry, we're still waiting for that big push into the mainstream. I have the feeling that the problem is that we cannot bend the law of physics. Yeah? They will always stay like that, limited in some way, and that it might be that we will never have it in the mainstream. What do you think about the development of the last couple of years, and do you see a future actually there, or is it just smiling for, okay, we have some business in B2B, but that's it?
So I think first it's important to understand that the XR industry today is a $30 billion industry this year. So this is not a future prediction or forecast. It's actually already a pretty significant business, delivering revenue for many, startups and larger corporations, hardware, software, both consumers and enterprises. And an interesting fact is it's been growing pretty steadily over the last 10 years at 30% year over year, which makes it the fastest growing tech sector, except for AI, which, of course, is going through the stratosphere these days. But it shows that, it's not about, an overnight success. This is something that is valuable, and it's growing steadily and will continue to grow that way, or maybe even faster. And if you look at like the mass market, when it comes to a headset, yes, there's no headset right now that is geared for the mass market, and that's because this technology is hard. That the culture of adopting such a thing is extremely hard, and it's going to take time. Of course, we'll get back to Apple in a second, but even the Apple Vision Pro is not going to be a mass market device in the near term. But there's a lot happening. First of all, on the enterprise side, there's companies like Vuzix and Realware and others that are actually finding good business within the enterprise. These are devices that what some people would call assisted reality. So, it's not covering your full field of view. It's just giving you sort of heads up information about the task at hand. But it's already delivering significant value to those employees, those workers, and revenue for these companies. I mean, Vuzix is one of these companies that have been in this industry for 20 years and now are growing and really closing revenue. So that's on the enterprise side. On the consumer side, we still have those smartphones, which are still the ideal device to deliver augmented reality. And again, you can argue that some of these experiences are kind of silly for entertainment purposes, like face filters. But I find face filters as an amazing way to penetrate into the mindset of, on one hand, of creators, but also of consumers. Just everyone out there. The selfie generation is just an ideal thing to kind of show you how you can augment your face or your environment with AR. And that is, of course, Snapchat has been one of the pioneers and leaders in this space. They have hundreds of thousands of creators that are developing AR today, and that's kind of building this army of people that will drive the industry forward when we move into headsets and into really spatial computing. And again, then the users, consumers, advertisers are learning about how this can help with the engagement with their audiences, and that's also driving revenue. A big part of Snap's revenue is coming from AR advertising and engagement. So that's kind of a major way to penetrate the mainstream. And then, of course, there's shopping, which I think for many of the retailers in the market, it has demonstrated that AR is a much better way to ensure to kind of convert consumers into buyers, because you can see how the product is going to look on your face, on your body, or in your room, and the likelihood of return goes down significantly, and that's a huge win for retailers. So anyone from Amazon to Walmart to Shopify to House have adopted AR in a very big way, and through that also kind of educated the market about the uses of that thing. And people don't even think about it as AR. They just think, see it in my room or see it in my world, and that's doing the job of really advancing it and growing this industry. There's another aspect which is kind of fascinating to me that it's not widely spread, and that is the Google Maps Live View feature. And I'm just flabbergasted that people are not aware of this incredible capability. Mm-hmm. So anywhere in the world, you pull up your phone with Google Maps, whether it's Android or iPhone, you look around, it will recognize where you are and show you AR instructions of where to go to your destination, with arrows and banners and things like that. That's kind of the ultimate dream of AR. Mm-hmm. And Google were actually able to make it work everywhere. I tried it over 4 continents in remote places, and it works amazingly well. So I think more people need to try it and benefit from it, because sometimes you come out of the subway or out of a building and you have no idea where's north, and especially in cities you have this canyon effect where the blue dot kind of runs around. With AR, you can actually position yourself very accurately and give you instructions which are much more intuitive. So I think that's one area where I would love to see more people try to use it, because the tech is there and it's pretty mature. So anyway, a lot of other examples out there of people kind of starting to use it and learning more about it, and it's also driving revenue for many companies. And now with Apple announcing, not releasing yet, the new headset, I think more than anything else, it signals to the industry that this is real. This is not a fad.
Yeah.
This is something that the largest tech company, and in many ways the most responsible tech company. I mean, Apple doesn't release products just for fun or just to try things. When they do it, they put everything behind it. And that's what you see with the Vision Pro. It's, as they say, probably the most complicated tech they've ever released. And that's why it's also pretty expensive.
Yeah.
But it shows to everyone in the market that this is a serious thing, and you already see the impact of that before the product is in the market. You see investors jumping on opportunities more than just a couple of months before. You see the market is looking at it in a different way. All the concerns around Meta wasting all their money on the metaverse is pretty much gone from the discussion. So I think it injected with a lot of positive energy into the market and will help the whole thing kind of grow.
Yeah. Before we come to Apple, I have two more questions in the timeline, and maybe you don't answer them too long, because actually we managed to actually take all the time we had, 90 minutes we have scheduled, and we gonna take them. I have the feeling, and it's great actually. So two questions and maybe a little bit shorter answer, please. First is the metaverse hype. It started, it ended, it took 18 months. Almost everybody was talking about the metaverse. What do you make out of those 18 months? What did it do to the industry? What did it do to us? What should we take out of the hype? Even when we are the people thinking, okay, I'm happy that it's over because now we can actually go back and do substantial stuff. What should we take out of those 18 months?
Yeah, terms are really critical. Sometimes you say, terms are not that important, but they have huge implications on industries, and for the good and the bad. I think when the hype started around metaverse, it wasn't actually Meta driving it. It wasn't Facebook. It was Roblox valuing the company at $38 billion as a pure metaverse company with hundreds of millions of users, active users. And then Fortnite also kind of raising money with valuation of hundreds of billions of dollars. These two were really the impetus of the rise of the metaverse term. And I mean, they decided to use it because, in many ways, they were exactly kind of delivering on that original vision that, Neil Stephenson wrote about in Snow Crash. And they were extremely successful companies. I suspect that, Facebook decided to change the name to Meta, not just because they believed in this as kind of their way forward, but also as a sort of distraction. I think we have to admit that was kind of part of the reason for the name change from some of the woes they had, in past years. What it did, it's one of the top tech companies in the world putting, and it seems like they're putting all the eggs in this metaverse basket. And that was a risky move, for a large company. And startup can do that, but such a huge company, when it does that, it gets all the eyes and all the arrows from everyone. So you started to see a lot of people that are just bashing metaverse just because why not, right? All the pundits and all the financial folks that had no idea what it really means. They didn't see it delivering immediate revenue, so why should they care about it? They're just bashing it. And that, of course, hurt the term as well as the industry. So there's, probably some positioning issues around that. There were really good folks in the industry, of course, like Matthew Ball wrote the book about the metaverse, which were trying to really provide the big picture around it and to really explain all the potentials. But I feel like, from my perspective, going back to my comment on the fact that it should be more viewed as the way we use the term cyberspace. It's just, kind of an amorphic term that describes an idea, which is when we experience the internet and all the information in the world in a spatial way. So it's all around us. It's not on a 2D screen. That's the big change. So if cyberspace was on, it didn't actually say it's 2D, right? But it was online. But for most people, it meant 2D experience. Metaverse would be similar concept, just in a 3D experience that feels like the real world. So, I mean, that's how, when people ask me, how do you define the metaverse? I was trying to stay away from all these technical definitions and really go into that wider definition. And, again, unfortunately, like happens, that term now has a baggage. There's another thing which we haven't talked about, that there were really two camps in the metaverse growth, the rise of this term. One was, of course, the XR industry, which felt, we're building the metaverse, and that's what we're always been about.
The real metaverse.
Then you had also the Web3 folks
Yeah.
Said, no, we're the metaverse. The metaverse is about decentralization. It's about taking the control away from the big corporations and into the people using blockchain and crypto concepts. And they said this is the future of the internet and what the metaverse is really all about. So it was kind of fun to see those two camps developing, and of course that didn't help. It definitely confused people about what it is. I was always kind of trying to find the almost like the union between these two groups, because there's some shared goals and shared ideals between those two groups, and that's what, as an industry, we need to focus on, so that we don't just tear apart this whole industry and confuse
Yeah.
the hell out of everybody.
Well, maybe one problem got solved by the AI hype. Most Web3 experts are now AI experts. So that's the joke running on LinkedIn right now.
Yes.
Okay, so next question. What also happened was that the Metaverse Standards Forum got founded. And actually, yesterday, the Alliance for OpenUSD was announced. So what we see is some kind of a whole group of standards organizations starting with different goals. And I would like to hear what you think about those standards organizations. Are they of any use actually? What kind of role do they play? Because to be honest, usually most people don't hear anything from them. They're just there. Sometimes you see somebody on a conference taking having a talk, but what kind of role do they have in the industry, and why should I actually be engaging with them?
I think these standards organizations are critical for the growth of the industry, for driving adoption, and for removing a lot of the friction and barriers in the industry. I mean, if you think about just us communicating right now, there's like 100 standards that are supporting this ability for us to do this. And if you go back to trains or electricity, without standards, the world would look completely different. So they're really critical. But the funny thing about standards is that it's hard to push for standards up front. I mean, I can tell back in 2009, we were bringing together some of the startups in the industry to agree on certain standards as early as then. And on one hand, we felt like it's an important service for the industry, but we also knew that standards tend to be defined more in retrospect. So once you have a big player that is using a standard, is willing to share it with others, that's when it becomes proliferated with others. And there are some standards wars that have been tearing industries in the past. VHS comes to mind as a winner. With the beta cassettes of the 80s. The faster you agree on a standard, the faster it is, or the better it is for the industry. So I'm hoping that these organizations would really be successful. I think that the Open USD is probably a really good example of some of the big players in the industry agreeing on it, and it becomes a de facto standard, whether it's official or not, and people will use it moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have been working on it for years. Pixar is working on it, of course, invented USD. Apple is using it since years. And yeah, they are using it for their new device. And now we are going to the new Apple device, the new product category, first product category since the Apple Watch. I saw an interview with you in April 22 last year, where you said we are all waiting for Apple glasses, and this year it actually happened. What was your first thought when you saw what Apple actually announced? Have you been like, oh my God, what did they do? Or was it like, finally?
Absolutely. It was a big finally. It's here. It's awesome. That was kind of my initial reaction. I actually wrote a post about it, which started exactly like that. It's finally here and it's awesome. And it's a great day for the industry. I think they hit the nail on the head in almost every aspect of this device and this announcement. Like I said before, they've been working on AR. They wanted to deliver a product in this category for a decade now. And every year since probably 2017, we've been saying it's next year. So this year, it's actually finally next year really happening. But I mean, I think it's interesting to note that Apple on one hand, wanted to they always time the market in the best way possible, so that when they release the product is perfect and ready for the market, and the market is ready for it. And I feel like this time around, there were some debates internally at Apple because some folks didn't feel like it's perfect enough to, according to Apple's kind of ethos. And the reason they decided to launch it now is very simple. If you look at iPhone revenues, and not just iPhone, actually, Samsung revenues from smartphones, it's the first year that it's going down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly the motivation that these companies need in order to start a new wave, a new generation of technologies. I drew back, what was it, in 2013? I drew this really simple chart that was looking at the inflection point. Inflection point is defined when a previous wave of technology is starting to go down and a new generation of technology is crossing it, meaning selling more of the new devices or new technologies than the old technologies. And that's exactly where we are right now. We're seeing that the old technology is starting to go down. Companies are panicking, investors are panicking, because how do you continue to have these companies grow? So they couldn't wait any longer. And they came out with a product that is probably the best they could have done at given technology in the market. It's looking like from all aspects, it's better than anything we have seen in the market. So now, it's just a matter of seeing it in our hands and really experiencing it. But based on the people that have tried the demos, every single one of them was extremely impressed.
Yeah.
Even the biggest critics. So of course, not everything is perfect about it, but they hit the nail on the head, as I said, and can't wait to try it myself.
Yeah, and they did also enough new things. Like it's not only important to do something better, but also do new things. For example, what they did is they actually delivered a VR headset, which wants to be an AR headset. What do you think about that one?
That's a great observation, and I also felt the same. It's the first VR headset that is called an AR headset.
Yeah.
And on one hand, it's in line with Tim Cook's, messaging positioning over the last few years, where he said, it's all about AR. He's fascinated with AR, never talking about VR or the metaverse. In fact, SVP of marketing for Apple said that that's a word that they will never use, the word metaverse. Yeah, but you cannot deliver today an AR headset that can deliver a good experience. So what's the next best thing? Is a VR headset that has all the characteristics of an AR headset, meaning you cannot have a transparent device. So let's show the eyes outside. That's a very new, innovative thing on Apple's part. The other thing is that I loved is that there are no controllers, because spatial computing is about interacting in a natural way with the world around you. So controllers are in the way. Reach out your hand, and they invested a lot in making sure that works well. I mean, there's so many cameras that track your hand, so it's you can really feel natural in selecting and moving things. And then the demos were first and foremost about AR, and then of course, yeah, it can move into what they call environments where you kind of block the real world, but that's only kind of a secondary thing. The first priority is really about keeping you where you are,
Yeah.
just improving the way you do things.
And they even make it almost impossible to use it as VR, as they lock you on the place you are when you're in those environments. Like you cannot walk around. They will actually make it transparent again because you dare to walk around. So they really seem to focus on the AR experience. One very important thing I heard in the April 22 interview was that you said it would be very important to change how privacy works when we will have something like metaverse or in a 3D internet spatial computing era. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest lesson on privacy came, of course, with the Google Glass, where probably one of the reasons it did not succeed is that people raised concerns around privacy. That walking around with a camera on your face and everything can be recorded. That was, of course, kind of a ridiculous thing, because in any case, we're walking around with smartphones and recording everything, right? So it's not a huge change. Because of that new form factor that's on our face, it changes something. It's much harder for people to accept it culturally. Plus, this idea that, when you think about spatial computing, when everything you do can be tracked by cameras that see what you see, that understand your hand movements, your head movements, they know exactly where you are, they can see your room, the whole issue of privacy becomes a million times more complex than with smartphone, which is already a big issue, right? So I think it's definitely a much bigger issue than we've seen before. And on one hand, I think to a certain degree, people need to accept the fact that, if they want to have a natural interaction, that their privacy is a bit more exposed. But I think it's on the responsibility of these companies that are developing these products to ingrain privacy in the heart of the product. And Apple has been known for trying that hard, right? I mean, the fact that your information is only on the device, it's not shared online, that they're promising you not to track certain things, or you can set it up that way. So I think it's going to be important for every company in this space to really follow that idea that the privacy is part of the product, and you cannot be the product like you have, like we've been with social media. That has to change dramatically, and they'll have to think about ways to generate value for the companies, for their shareholders, in a different way than by kind of tracking your every movement. And I think one of the answers is probably in anonymizing information, because we can learn a lot from what people do in the real world. But if you aggregate information across many people, you can almost understand how the world works, which is, for me, it's like a fascinating idea. This idea that we could create the spatial Wikipedia just by tracking how everybody operate the world, but in an anonymous way. So you don't know specifically what a person is doing, but just humanity as a whole. I think that could be a huge next step for humanity.
Do you think the industry can manage that by themselves, or do we need the help of the regulators?
It's a big question now around AI, right? That the companies think they can regulate themselves, mostly because they don't believe the government understands anything about it. But the reality is probably somewhere in the middle. Yes, these companies need to be much more responsible. They need to take steps towards privacy and towards regulating themselves. But it's going to require an outside organization, and mostly governments, to ensure that and to police that they're actually doing it. Because once it's free roam, people will take advantage of that, and it's becoming more and more serious and critical for humanity. So we need everybody to look into it.
Yeah. Where people should free roam is absolutely AWE in October in Vienna. And I think everybody should join us for that conference, because all that what you heard right now and much more will be, of course, topic of that conference. Ori, thank you very much for that really great interview, for the great insights, and can't wait to see you in Vienna.
Can't wait to see you too, Thomas. And thanks very much for the in-depth interview. It's been fascinating.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
And that was episode 46 of Spatial Realities. Thanks again to Ori Inbar for the interview. If you like this podcast, I would be happy if you could recommend it. Feel free to share the episode on social media, send it to colleagues and friends, and write a comment on Apple Podcast and Spotify. I'd also like to point you to our Discord server. You can find a link in the show notes or on spatialrealities.de. My name is Thomas Riedel, and thank you for listening, and I can't wait to have you with us next time.
Dieser Podcast ist eine Droidboy-Produktion.